Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on step-by-step the Higg FEM verification trail. So this is our last section in the verification trail, and it is going to be on chemicals management. Before we start, let me just give you a brief background about our organization. We are a young organization with a lot of experience, and this is spearheaded by our CEO, who is Ms. Karen Eckberg. She has vast experience in the sustainability field. We have been doing many different projects on materiality assessment, on strategy development, chemical management implementations across the entire value chain. And in 2019, Karen has also been awarded the Higg Index Verification Leadership Award at the ITMA event. And just a small brief about myself before we go on. I'm a textile technologist with over 24 years of experience in textile safety and consulting domain. I have been a lead auditor for 14,001 and 45,001. And with leadership and sustainability, I am a Higg FEM verifier and a trainer, a BPI consultant, also a ZDHC trainer, and a BRM verifier. So it will be my pleasure to be hosting this webinar for all of you. Before we go on, also let me please do mention that all of this material, whatever you are seeing here, is copyrighted with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and with Leadership and Sustainability. Please do use this for your own internal training purposes and for understanding of the module. It is definitely our endeavor that each of you should have and gain a lot of value from whatever we are delivering, but kindly refrain from distributing this externally. This is our panel. We will be exchanging notes with each other via the Zoom panel. And we would here request that you put in all of your questions in the question and answer panel. The chat function is also open. This is just for any kind of references that you would like to have with me during the session. But please put in all of your questions into the question and answer panel so that there will be a record of what are the questions that have been coming into the session. And of course, you will get a copy of the presentation in a follow-up email. This is our agenda for today. We will talk about chemicals management. We will have some time for questions and discussion. And we would like to present you with our FEM training and verification offer, and also talk a bit about our team who is in place in the markets. So we have seen in our trail that we have gone through the different sections in Higg FEM, and we have understood what are the different impact areas that we need to look into. We have seen some impact areas have applicabilities, and chemicals management section that we will be going into is also an area where we will have applicabilities. We saw, let me just refresh to you the different other sections that we have gone through before we go ahead. So we had seen facility info and permit section, where we saw that we have to input the details about the facility, the type of manufacturing that you are doing. So this is a section we understood which is not scored. We also went into the environmental management system. This is a section which has no applicability. It is relevant for everybody who is filling in the FEM. All of them have to put in the details in the environmental management system and complete the questions there. We saw energy and G. This is a very important area where a lot of brands are working on trying to reduce the impact in the supply chain. And this is where we will be able to optimize and show the expertise when we are putting in the information in this particular section. Water use, this is a resource which is to be optimized, and we saw how we will be able to go through the water use. Water use is a section where there is applicability. So also wastewater and air emissions. Waste is a section which we saw is common for everybody, and chemicals management system is also a section which has applicability, and we will talk about it as we go on. So here we are in the chemicals management section. And we have seen that with the Higg FEM that there can be a large improvement in this particular section based on the insights that have been provided from the Higg FEM feedbacks from SAC. And this is one section where all of us would be able to bring in a lot of improvement. And unlike in the other sections which touch upon just that specific area, like for example, if you're looking at energy, you are just talking about the energy parameter. If you're looking at waste, we are looking only at the waste parameter. Unlike that, in chemicals management, this aspect will touch upon all parts of your business. That is right from your inventory, from your purchasing, your production flow to storage, your waste locations. And a robust chemical management program should basically contain advanced practices in your chemical management policies, in your procedures, in your commitments, in your employee training, in your the information that you are providing, awareness that you are providing about chemicals, in your inventory management. You should also have an emergency response plan. You should have product traceability. And finally, in the later sections in level 3, we are going to be talking about the improvements that we will be able to bring in to the module, and also about some advanced practices, the process innovations that we will be able to bring in. So this is a very interesting section, and I will be happy to take you through the entire section. So where exactly in the facility are chemicals used? Initially, when you come into the module and when you start to fill in the chemical section, you will be asked questions on what are the points which are applicable to your specific facility. So you will have to answer whether you have chemicals, you are using chemicals in dyeing and tanning, in your fabric finishing, screen printing, in metal finishing, if you're using it as primers. Some facilities may also be using your spot cleaners only. So you will be asked questions based on this to understand whether you are using these chemicals, where exactly are you using these chemicals in your operations. And here again, you have your applicabilities. These are some of the areas where you will be able to mention based on what exactly or where exactly you are using the chemicals. Perhaps you have printing operations, perhaps you have laundry or washing operations. You have cementing and gluing, which is done at your end, laminations, metal finishings, welding. If you are having painting applications, that can be indicated. So these are your applicabilities that are responsible. And based on these applicabilities, you are classified under two different categories. One is a facility which uses chemicals in the production processes, and one is where you are using chemicals in tooling and operations only. So these are the two different categories under which you will fall. And if you are using chemicals in production processes, let's say there are certain processes where there are chemicals, it could be even 3 or 4 chemicals. It is ideal that you indicate the same. And this is how you would have to respond to the questions. And based on your applicability, you will be posed the further set of questions for the module. And actually, chemical management section is one of the most longest and most intricate sections in Higg FEM, where you have a lot of details which are being requested from you. And here you see all of the level 1 questions. So there are a total of 13 level 1s here. And here you have to understand and track the performance. Your total in your level 1 is a total of 25 points. And next you have your level 2 questions and your level 3 questions. So you have 3 questions in level 2, which are a total of 50 points. And you have again a certain set of questions in level 3, which are a total of 25 points each, 25 points altogether, sorry. This is how the scoring is distributed in the Higg FEM. And let's come to the very first question, which is on the chemical inventory. Now, the moment we say that we are using chemicals in our facility, we would be required to keep an inventory of all the chemicals that are used by us, and we will have to maintain it in a particular format. So here what we have provided for you is a downloadable template, which has been provided by ZDHC. And it was seen during all of the brand audits that when the audits were taking place, it was seen that the chemical inventory was not maintained in a uniform manner by the facilities. And this is one thing that ZDHC wanted to streamline. And that is why there is the specific template that has been provided. And here you would require to give all of the chemicals which are used in the manufacturing processes. So here you would require to include chemicals which are used as reactants, which are used as additives, if you're using it in printing, in dyeing, in your wastewater treatment plant, etc. All of them you would require to indicate in this section. You will also require to include the chemicals which are there in the tooling and equipment maintenance. So all of your lubricants, all of your greases, all of the different chemicals that will be used in tooling and lubrication will have to be included there. All of the chemicals that are used to maintain and operate the facility. So these are your sanitation chemicals that you will have to include. So ideally try and maintain different tabs where you will be able to have a good overview of what are the different chemicals that are coming into your system. And this template, if we go into the template, there are 3 different areas in which you will be able to maintain this template. You have the foundational level where a set of information is required to be filled in. You have the progressive level, and then you have also the aspirational level. And you will see this when you actually go into the template. And it is recommended that you maintain your chemical inventory at least at the foundational level. Okay, so there is a question here, how to check by the chemical name and its MSDS whether chemical is ZDHC MRSL compliant or not. This is a very good question that you have raised here. Ideally, you should have access to the ZDHC gateway. And if you are having access to the ZDHC gateway, there you will be able to check for the compliance of that particular chemical, whether it is ZDHC compliant or not. What is the MRSL compliance, whether it is level 1, level 2, or level 3. So for all the suppliers, access to the ZDHC gateway is complimentary. You will be able to get access to the gateway. You can either ask your brand or you can apply directly. We also have a document which will help you to understand and gain access to the gateway in case you do not have that already. Okay, let's move on. My request is that all of you maintain chemical inventory, at least at the foundational level. You might not have all of the information all required also for the progressive and aspirational level, but the foundational level is a very basic level where you would be able to include all of the information. But it is important to note that everything that you are using in your facility, whether it be a sanitation chemical, whether it be a tooling chemical, whether it be a maintenance chemical, all of them should be listed and it should be handled by the chemical management team. And what are the other ancillary questions that are there in question 1? It is, does your facility's chemical inventory include chemical identification data? Here you will have to check all of them that apply to your facility. That is the chemical name and type, the supplier, who is the vendor who's giving you this material, whether you have a safety data sheet for this particular chemical or not. You should also include the availability of the safety data sheet and the date of issue of this particular safety data sheet. What is the function of the chemical? This is also an important parameter that we need to consider. The hazard classification, you should also have different hazard classifications that are mentioned on the safety data sheets included in your chemical inventory. Where is the chemical used? Is it a softener? Is it a dyeing auxiliary? Is it a printing paste that you are using? Is it wastewater treatment chemical? So where exactly is this chemical used? What is the storage condition and the location? What are the quantities of the chemicals that have actually been used? So these are some of the details that are required to be included into your chemical inventory and which you would require to mention. And you have part C of the chemical inventory question, which is asking you, does your facility's chemical inventory include the following data? So here you would require to maintain the CAS number of the chemicals which are coming into your facility, the lot number of the chemicals as well, because this is one thing which will give you a lot of edge in your chemical management system. If you are maintaining the lot numbers, having this in your ERP, and you are able to bring in traceability into your system. MRSL compliance, like we mentioned, the MRSL compliance can be checked via the gateway. You will be able to understand and report whether the chemicals that are coming in are MRSL compliant or not. Or you could also have a purchase policy which forbids you from buying any chemical which are not MRSL compliant. That would be the most ideal situation, where you are having a very robust chemical purchasing policy which prevents you from bringing in any chemical from outside which is not MRSL compliant. And then you will, of course, require to maintain the purchase date. What is the chemical expiry date if it is applicable? This again is something that you should check with your supplier. It might not be evident. And in the chemical inventory, as you will see in the ZDHC template also that is given, there are many different columns which are available. You have columns which are indicated in blue, and you have also columns which are in black. Those which are in black are mandatory. Those which are in blue are, if you have the information, do include it, because it would be important for you to note this information at your end. So your suggested upload here would be the chemical inventory. And remember also, the chemical inventory is something that is a live document. We should ideally see that it is updated very regularly. It is kept up to date up with the latest chemicals that have come into your system. If there have been requests for new chemicals that are pending, it should have those information as well. You should have the information of whether, if the permits are required for storing certain chemicals beyond a certain volume, you would require to have permits, and wherever those permits are required, you should have that indicated as well. And also any type of action plan for obtaining data that is not included in your inventory. Let us say the SDS of a new chemical that you have requested is not available, and you want to request for that. You have to have a cutoff date by when the particular SDS should be available to your facility or to your organization. There is one more question. Is it free to have a ZDHC gateway? I am from a vendor. Yes, it is free to have a ZDHC gateway. Anybody who is a supplier, who is a manufacturer, or an apparel manufacturer, can have access to the ZDHC gateway, and we will be able to help you with that. Okay, let's move on. And now we come to question number 2. Number 2 is on the SDS availability to ease. So here your question is, does your facility make the safety data sheet available to employees for all of the chemicals that are used? Are the safety data sheets posted where hazardous chemicals are stored? And also, are safety data sheets available in languages that the workers understand, at least the sections that are directly related to the operational worker safety and storage requirements, such as your first aid, hazard, and flammability information, etc. So the question number 2 is basically about making the safety data sheet available to all employees. And it is very important that employees who are working with the chemicals are having access to the safety data sheets that are available within the organization, and that they are aware about all of the chemical hazards that are there with those chemicals. And all of the SDSs that you are procuring should be updated every 3 years. The workers have to be also trained in understanding the safety data sheet. Just a request, please put in all of your questions into the question and answer function and not into the chat function, so that they can all be addressed. But I do see something here. I will address that right now. We have displayed the MSDS on site, or units where chemicals are stored and have SDS that are available on demand, or is that fine for requirement? Yes, so long as you have the MSDS of all of the chemicals that are there in your specific location, that should be fine. You can store them in a binder file, or you can also paste them as you store those chemicals. You can paste them in an area where it can be accessible to the workers who are going to be using them. So those are the ideal conditions. And all right, there is one more question. Please share the document you're talking about regarding ZDHC MRSL compliance. Yes, we will share that to you. How many SDS section need to translate to local language? This should ideally be all of the sections which relate to first aid, which relate to the compatibility of the chemical, etc. Ideally, whoever is the chemical management person who is looking after the chemical management at the site should be in a position to translate the main elements of the yes. There is no ballpark figure that this has to be translated, or it is 5 different sections which have to be translated. It depends on the type of chemicals and the type of hazards that you have on site. I guess that answers this question. Thank you. All right. So your suggested upload for your SDS availability to employees is photo images which show that the MSDS is available and accessible to all of the employees. So please take photographs of the area where you are storing your chemicals, where you have pasted your MSDS just adjacent to the storage area where you're storing your chemicals. You should also ensure that all of the safety data sheets that you procure are GHS compliant. Now, we are aware that GHS compliance is not made mandatory in all of the countries, but ideally, we should be storing the MSDS that we have and be ensuring that they are all GHS compliant. If not, kindly request your supplier to provide you with a GHS compliant safety data sheet. You also should have all of the CLP compliant label information wherever the SDS is not immediately available at hand for the workers. So these are the different sections in your safety data sheets for your question number 2. When you are getting in the safety data sheets from your supplier, please try and see if all of these sections are available. Now, it is not mandatory that all of these sections have to have information. In certain cases, for example, your toxicological data, etc., can take quite some time to analyze and report. So they might not be immediately available when a new formulation is there in the market and perhaps you have to actually use it. But ideally, all of the main information of what is your hazard identification, what is the first aid action measures, what are the accidental release measures, all of this should ideally be available to you. So these are the 16 different sections that are there in the MSDS. And again, there is also a possibility that in your question number 2, in case you are a facility where you are not using chemicals in production, you do not have any type of tooling chemicals which require an SDS, you can say that this is not applicable as well for you, in which case your marks get distributed between the rest of the questions that are there that are applicable for you. I can see some more questions which have come in, so I'll just go and answer that. The obsolete SDS need to retain? If yes, how long? Ideally, if you have a fresh SDS for a particular chemical, that is the SDS that you will require to use. And you should try and insist that the SDS has been issued in the last 3 years, and you should not accept an SDS which is more than 10 years old or more than maybe 6 years old, etc. Please try and ensure that you have it in your chemical management procedures listed that you will request for an SDS, and the SDS that's issued from the supplier should be issued in the last 3 years. Okay, there's another question. For SDS that is GHS compliant, I only need the image of the page with GHS labels or the whole file. No, for the SDS that you're procuring from your supplier, you would of course need the whole file from the and you should ensure that you have all of the pages of the SDS. If suppose, let us say it is 5 pages that is of information that he's providing you, ensure that you have all of these 5 pages, and you can actually paste it next to where the chemical is stored, or you can also have just the labels which talk about what are the hazards for that particular chemical, which are listed in a large print format just next to the chemical. So that is how you will be storing it. What is a CLP? This is chemical labeling. So this is a practice where you are expected to show what is the hazard of that particular chemical for the workers who are using that specific chemical. Okay. How to address risk assessment at the storage area? Is any written guidance or any reference? Please suggest or help to share. Risk assessment, again, is something that has to be done at your facility based on the type of chemicals that you are bringing into the facility. For example, if you are wanting to understand how to conduct a risk assessment, I would request you to go to the ZDHC website, the www.roadmaptozero.com, and you have a section there where you talk about where there are a lot of documents, and here you can see the hazard assessment that can be done for different chemicals. So this is one site where you would be able to get this information. Is training mandatory on chemical handlers on SDS? Yes, training is mandatory for all of the people who are handling the chemicals on SDS. And there is one more question here, which is, under what conditions should I hire a chemical specialist verifier? We are a cut and sew facility and use only chemical for operation, but no chemical involved in production. Okay, for example, lubricant or sewing machine, diesel backup. Okay, so here a chemical specialist verifier is required if you are going into level 2 and 3. You can go into level 2 and 3 also for facility which is using just chemicals in their tooling and production. So it will depend on the type of questions that you have answered, where you will need to decide whether you need to have a chemical specialist verifier or not. Okay. Let's move ahead. We are still in question number 2. And here we have SDS management, some of the best practices that we would like to share with you. You should have designated staff in charge of managing and updating your SDS documentation. Ensure that there are procedures and the staff responsible is able to understand chemical procurement, how to handle the chemicals once it reaches the facility, and how to request for SDSs from the chemical supplier. You should also have procedures and dedicated staff to review the SDS and ensure that the most recent version of the SDS has been procured from the chemical supplier. So this is something that we would request you to have in your chemical management practice. And it's a good practice to have updated version of the SDS every 3 years, more regularly if you have required by the local law. And anytime there has been a change in the manufacturing process or in the way in which the chemical has actually been formulated, you should have a fresh SDS which is issued. So this is also something that you would require to understand as a chemical in charge in your facility, whether how exactly is the chemical being manufactured, has there been a change in the manufacturing process, is something that you would require to be aware of. And again, some more best practices that we would like to share. You should post the SDS or maintain the SDS in a binder in each work area where the chemical is actually used. When choosing where to keep your SDS, consideration should be given to providing quick and easy access to the information. Ideally, let's say there is a spill or there is an information that the worker is requiring to understand, he should have access to the SDS. So you can have, there are many instances where you have binders which are available to where you can flip the pages and reach the SDS very quickly, but you should also be able to ensure that it is alphabetically ordered and kept so that people are able to reach that quickly. Or you can paste it just next to the chemical drums where it is stored. You can have sections where it is pasted, and you can have boards through which you can flip through and understand the SDSs. You can also have simplified SDSs which are created and pasted next to the section where the chemical is stored. And ideally, you should have chemical hazards which are indicated there, and you should also have appropriate emergency responses which are indicated. So also note that a simplified SDS is not a substitute for your full GHS compliant SDS. This is something that you should definitely have. If simplified SDSs are used, you can maintain a dedicated location, and it should also be available to all of the employees. Okay, there is a question here. If we never change our chemicals and suppliers, should we still update versions of the SDS every 3 years? Yes, of course. Even if you are not changing your chemicals, even if your formulator has not changed his method of production, etc., you should still request for updated SDS every 3 years. How can we know is the formulation or manufacturing process changed or not for a particular chemical? This is something that you will have to understand from your supplier. You will have to also, apart from just procuring or issuing invoices for the chemicals as and when you require, this is a due diligence check that you would require to make at the supplier end to understand what is his manufacturing process, how is he doing it, is he procuring the chemical from different places, mixing it together and then giving it to you, is he actually manufacturing it? These are, of course, chemical management best practices which you would require to maintain. So unless you have this due diligence, you will not be aware about it. And also is there any platform where CAS number is showing for verification? So the CAS number is ideally, or you can have that from your MSDS. It is generally there in the information that the supplier is providing to you. And if it is not, you can ask your supplier for the CAS number of the chemicals. In certain cases, the CAS number may not be publicly available. You might have to request for the same from the supplier and then maintain it in your record. If a supplier denies to share the CAS number, should we go ahead with him? Again, it depends on the type of chemical that he is providing to you. If it is a very confidential chemical, which is a patented chemical where which if you use, you're going to have a lot of value at your end, then perhaps you have to consider and you have to see if you are going to keep this and whether the supplier is in a position to share this information with you confidentially. This is something that you can decide based on the situation. But ideally, your chemical management practice should be such that you should have it in your procedure that you are going through the gateway, you are ensuring that the chemical that you procure is MRSL compliant, you are having a full information of whether it is MRSL 1, 2, or 3 compliant, and only then procuring your pills that are required for your facility. Okay, let's move on. Question number 3 is with regard to employee training. And here the question is, does your facility train all the employees who use chemicals on chemical hazards, risk and proper handling, and what to do in the case of an emergency or a spill? Here you would require to ensure that all of the chemicals that are there or that are taken into your boundaries are covered by hazard assessment. Your workers should be aware as to what is to be done when there is an emergency situation for a particular chemical. You should also maintain the records of the number of employees trained and what is the frequency of the training. Training is one aspect which has been given a lot of importance by the Higg FEM platform from the past 2 years. So it is important that you maintain the records of what is the trainings that have been conducted, who have been trained, and what is the frequency at which you are training them. Next is your question number 4, which is on your emergency response plan. And here it is, does your facility have a chemical spill and emergency response plan that is periodically practiced? And a suggested upload here for you is your training topic. Who are the number of employees who have been trained? What is the frequency of the training? What is the emergency plan that you have in place? So ideally, there are certain requirements for the emergency plan that is to be generated at your facility. And we will touch upon that. I would like to also talk about the number of employees trained. Ideally, the Higg FEM requires that all of the employees who are there in the facility should be trained on the chemical emergency plan. So it should not be only the people who are actually working with the chemical. So this is something that you would require to ensure. And this is the expectation of the emergency response plan. So the expectation is that you should have a written up-to-date emergency response plan, which is available for the facility. You should have instructions on how to evacuate the building. You should have the contact names and the information of the individuals who are in charge of the evacuation procedure. You should have primary and secondary escape routes, which are already meted out. There should be simple instructions which are posted. There should be entrances which are allocated near the elevators, telephones, etc. So you should have all of this very clearly meted out in your emergency response plan. You should also have emergency response leaders who are assigned for specific duties. Now, there could be people who are handicapped. There could be people who are having certain issues, maybe anxiety attacks, etc. There should be people who are assigned in your team who will be able to lead out all of these people. Disabled workers who have a certain history, who have medical conditions, etc., should be assigned with an emergency response leader who should be able to guide them out to safety. You should have the stairways that are kept free of materials. Many cases we have seen that it is generally in the stairways that you have a lot of material which tends to get accumulated over time. So this should definitely be not encouraged. We should ensure that the stairways, etc., are free from any type of storage which could hinder the evacuation process. And also, you should, just like how you have regular fire drills, you should also have regular emergency chemical spill drills, which are conducted so that people will be aware as to what needs to be done when there is an emergency. And the drills should be treated as if they were an actual emergency. So when you hear the fire alarm, we are all expected to come out of the offices and come and accumulate at a particular area when there is an emergency. So a similar drill should be conducted also for all of your chemical emergencies. You should have important contact numbers, such as your emergency fire department, your ambulances, etc., which are pasted close to each and every phone that is there. Maintain emergency shower and eye stations which are available within the distance from where emergency could actually occur. Keep a first aid kit which is clearly marked and accessible, protected against dust and water. And you should have in the kit, you should have an inspection tag to document monthly checks that are done to ensure that all of the things that are there within the emergency kit have not expired. You should have written first aid instructions in local language and a list of all the items that are there in the emergency kit with their expiry date. Any sample of best emergency plan that you would be able to share? I am extremely sorry. These are generally shared in our more detailed training sessions, but you are most welcome to come into one of them and we will be able to help you with that. One thing, should we collect the MRSL testing report for any chemical that is to be used in our wet processing? Is it mandatory? Ideally, yes, you should collect the MRSL testing report. And if you have access to the gateway and if you have the information out there, that is also fine, because the formulators who are uploading their chemicals on the gateway will have to complete the test, and only then will they have their chemical as MRSL level 2 or level 3 compliant. So that is all. If you're going through the gateway, then you would not require to have this specifically in your system, but if not, yes. Can we check about ZDHC MRSL compliant by CAS number online or any list of suppliers which are ZDHC compliant? My suggestion here would be that you please go through the ZDHC gateway for your MRSL compliance checks. What are 3 levels means that you are explaining? See, MRSL compliance, there is level 1, there is level 2, and there is level 3. And each of the 3 levels means that there is a certain level of compliance that is passed. So level 3 is the highest, level 1 is the minimum. And ideally, in your chemical manufacture or in your chemical management procedure, you should have a clause which says that you will procure a chemical only if it is at least level 1 compliant. Level 2 and a 3, it means that there have been further checks that have been done to ensure that it is MRSL compliant. Sorry. Okay. So those are the questions for now. And there was one more question, which is how many time chemical training should be done yearly? So it depends on the type of chemicals that you procure. If there are no changes in the chemicals, perhaps it is done twice in a year. But if there are frequent changes in the chemicals that you will procure, maybe you might need to do one training every quarter. But ideally, one every quarter is something that is very commonly seen, because what happens is there are changes in the chemical inventory, there are changes in personnel which happen, there are new chemicals which come in. So because of that, we very often or frequently see that at least there is a chemical management training that is done every quarter for the organization. Okay, let's come to number 5, which is on safety equipment. So the question here is, does your facility have appropriate and operable protective safety equipment as recommended by GHS safety data sheets in all areas where the chemicals are stored and used? Again, for this particular question, we would suggest that you upload your schedule for internal checks and audits for chemical safety. Also, if you have a list of PE and the safety equipment with schedules of whatever are the stock replenishments that you are doing for your PE, whatever are the equipment maintenance that you are doing for your PE, etc., all of that can be shown as evidence for this particular question. Next, we come to question number 6, which is on chemical hazard signage. So the question here is, does your facility have chemical hazard signage and safe handling equipment in areas of the facility where the chemicals are used? And this is actually mandatory that you have the appropriate signages that are there, which should be pasted in the areas where you're storing your chemicals. Signages should be clearly visible. It should be understood by the relevant employees and workers. Many a time when the workers are interviewed and sometimes asked on what does a particular signage mean, sometimes they are not aware, and this would not be acceptable. It should be understood. There are 9 different GHS signs which each and every worker in the facility is expected to be aware of. And once he sees this sign, he should be aware that there is a particular danger associated with that chemical and how he should handle that chemical. Also, signages pasted at the storage and chemical operation areas depict the hazard classification of the chemical stored, and you should also have handling equipment available at relevant locations. These are the requirements for your chemical hazard signage. And here you see some examples of how you would be able to depict the hazards in your facilities. You can see an example of how signages are pasted just outside of the door. You should have a restricted entry. Definitely that's mentioned. You should have let us say a specific chemical is stored there. You should have the hazard signage of that specific chemical that is available for review. For view just outside of the door. Okay, there is one question. Can I confirm? Can I confirm the host just said about training chemicals 2 per year are minimum and 4 are as recommended, not a mandatory. So here, see, there is nothing that is mandatory. Higg FEM is a voluntary standard that is required. As per the Higg FEM, you should have trainings that are done on a regular basis. And again, the frequency of the training is dependent upon the facility, because you should, if it is an emergency response, or you should have emergency response drills that are done twice in a year. If it is trainings on hazards, etc., it is done based on the requirement of the organization. So it depends on how frequently are your personnel changing, how frequently are you bringing in new chemicals, etc. So I hope that answers your question there. Okay, next we move on to question number 7, which is on chemical purchasing based on MRSL and RSL. Here, before we go into the RSL question, we should first of all understand what is RSL and what is MRSL and what is the difference between the two. RSL stands for Restricted Substances List. So you will have many brands which have come out with their own restricted substances list, which talk about chemicals which are banned on the product. RSL is on the end product. MRSL is your manufacturing restricted substances list. And this talks about chemicals which are restricted in the chemicals which are coming into the facility. So this is a difference. This is an understanding that we should have before we go into the section and into the question. And you can see here that ZDHC, or rather when the brands first came out with their lists, it was the RSL lists. And later on, it was understood that because they were coming out with the RSL list, basically it is what is going into the product, which is coming out of the product. So that is why they wanted to restrict the chemicals that are coming out by restricting the chemicals that are going into the manufacture of the product. And that is why the MRSL list came out into the picture. Okay, and here we show you the latest MRSL version, which is applicable. So question number 7 is basically, does your facility select and purchase chemicals based on their hazard and MRSL requirement? If yes, do all chemicals purchased and used in the production meet the facility's chemical purchasing policy? And if no, do you have a process or plan for eliminating the chemicals that do not meet the facility's chemical purchasing policy? There are many different versions of the ZDHC MRSL which were launched, and the latest version that is there is the ZDHC version, MRSL version 3.0. This has come out in November 2022. They generally, when an MRSL version comes out, there is a certain period, there is a 1-year period which is given to the market for its adoption, because definitely all of the chemical formulators are not going to be in a position to suddenly transition from a 2.0 to a 3.0. Also, all the testings, etc., will not get done in a very short time. So it is in the November of 2023 where the version will fully transition into 3.0. Right now, there is both acceptance, that is version 2.0 as well as version 3.0. Both of them are currently going to be accepted. And here you can download the MRSL in its latest version. And this is the version that we are expected to follow. You will also see that whatever is there on the gateway will also slowly transition into version 3.0 compliance, because right now you will only see the version 2.0 compliance in certain chemicals. When we are looking at a purchasing procedure, what should the purchasing procedure cover? It should cover your CAS number control. You should have an MRSL declaration from your chemical supplier. You should have all of the test reports that are requested from the suppliers, the certificates. Let us say it is an Ocotex compliant product that you are purchasing. You should have the certificates to ensure that these are Ocotex compliant. They have been updated as and when there have been an expiry of the compliance in the market. Also, if the product that you are procuring is from a positive list, you should have this information from the dye stuff manufacturer or the auxiliary manufacturer. So ZDHC MRSL conformance levels, we talked about 1, 2, and 3 levels from the chemical gateway. You should use that for determining whether you would be in a position to purchase the chemical or not. So this is a part of your chemical procurement, and it should be a procedure that is embedded into your chemical purchasing policy. Let me just answer some more questions before we go on. Can any fabric supplier test chemical for ZDHC MRSL conformance for any level? If you are a fabric supplier, you can, of course, test them for MRSL conformance. Ideally, you can get them also from your chemical supplier, because it is a formulator who is expected to test the MRSL conformance and indicate his product on the gateway. But as a fabric supplier, you can also test that. You can have that as one of your quality assurance parameters which are there. This would definitely give you a lot of credit in your later questions, in your higher level questions specifically. Which company globally has highest chemical score? There is nothing like a highest chemical score. Level 3 in your MRSL is the highest level that we can go with MRSL conformance. And level 3 is applicable to many different chemical formulations. You can check that out in your gateway. Many manufacturers do not share CAS numbers. This time, how can control CAS number? Yeah, so if the manufacturer does not share the CAS number, in that case, you would require to request for that. Maybe confidentially, you would say that you would require to have that and maintain that in your inventory. Ideally, you should be, if you are going through many of the systems that are there, maybe the Chem IQ system, there are many systems which are there which will talk about the CAS numbers of the chemicals. So you can try and procure that through there. Does the SAC have a standard list of RSL, MRSL? So the RSL, MRSL is maintained by the Roadmap to Zero, the ZHC Foundation. Your MRSL to say, the RSL is basically maintained by the brands. So each brand, Gap will have its own RSL, US will have its own RSL. So each of the brand will have its own RSL. SAC does not maintain this RSL, MRSL list. How to decide which one should be followed? For the RSL list, of course, you will have to look at who is the brand that you are catering to. You will have to develop your own list of RSLs that you will maintain as a supplier, looking at the levels or looking at the limit values that each of your brands are actually going in for. For the MRSL, it is version 3.0, which needs to be followed. So I think that is clear. How to check the positive list? Some small factories may only use lubricating, nothing else. Yes, if you are a small factory using just one or two chemical, you can actually check if that one or two product that you are requiring is available from the ZDHC gateway or not, and take the chemical from a manufacturer who is having it as MRSL compliant. Okay. Let's move on. We are in question number 7. Question number 8 is regarding health and safety. So the question here is, does your team have an environmental and occupational health and safety program specific to chemicals management? And here you can upload a letter of appointment. What is the job description of the person who is responsible for health and safety within your facility? If you have an organization chart where you have included the health and safety responsible person in your chemical management team, you can include that. And also include any kind of experiences or training records. Let's say he has undertaken an Bosch training on health and safety, a 45,001 or internal training that is required. You can upload that as evidence to say that there is a program in place and this is the program that is followed for your facility. Also, if there are procedures related to chemical storage, you would require to use that or upload that. Permits with operating limits and relevant laws should also be indicated, and any chemical incident, accident, and spill records that you have can also be. So these are the evidences that are required. And when we're talking about health and safety, this is the hierarchy that we require to follow. The very first thing when we are talking about health and safety is we are trying to use chemicals with lower toxicity level. You can look at process changes that are required, maybe administrative changes. Maybe you are, instead of performing the experiment on a desktop, you're doing it within a glove box chamber so that any of the fumes that are coming out are not affecting the worker. You can try isolation of the chemicals in order to ensure that there is no hazard. You can try engineering controls, ventilation and engineering controls as the next level of control that you will bring in. PE is one of the bottommost parameters that you would consider when you're talking about health and safety. And finally, when nothing can actually be controlled, we will look at response. So this is the hierarchy that we will follow when we are looking at health and safety. And next we have the question on chemical storage. Does your facility have well-marked designated chemical storage and temporary storage areas? So ideally, your chemical storage area should be ventilated. It should be protected from your unauthorized employees. If there is an access card, then only people with those access cards should be allowed into the chemical storage area. It should have easy entry and exit in the case of an emergency. Your storage containers should be in good condition. It should all be labeled with the appropriate labels and also their contents. And here we show you some good practice examples of, this is an IBC tank which is available to store the chemical. You can see that it is protected from weather. It is ideally barricaded. Here you can see some examples of oil and lubricant storage as well. And here you see secondary containment. It is a good practice to have a secondary containment, and a secondary containment should ideally be at least 110% of the volume of the largest container stored and greater than 10% of the total volume of the stored substances. So this is what you should follow when you're looking at secondary containment for your organization as well. And here again, we have some good practice examples that can be indicated. You can see that all of the drums, etc., are stored within the secondary containment. You don't have anything which is stored directly on the ground. For larger volume, you have a secondary containment which is built in a particular manner. Another good practice for your chemical storage is also appropriate separation and segregation of your chemicals. Chemical compatibility information should be reviewed and considered when you're storing your chemicals, as in certain classes of chemicals, they are not compatible with each other. You should try and avoid ideally storing all of your acids and bases together. You should keep all of a certain chemicals in a particular area. Also, chemicals should be compatible with the materials and shelves that they are stored on. So here you can see an example where there has been degradation that has happened. It's an example of an acid degrading the metal storage container and the racking where it is stored. And this information basically will be found in section 7 in your GHS compliant SDS, section 7 and section 10. And why is chemical storage very important? There is a risk for soil and groundwater contamination. But this is something that we are trying to avoid. We do not want to have any kind of groundwater contamination coming from the facility, and everything that can be done at the facility for preventing this groundwater contamination should be considered, especially because it's a very costly thing finally to try and clean up a groundwater contamination or do a soil decontamination. So if you are aware of any type of problems that are arising, let's say you have sludge which is stored because of from where there is leaching which is happening, all of this can actually contaminate the ground where the actual storage is happening. So you should ideally have storage in your chemical storage which has a layer of resin in order to prevent any type of ground contamination. So resin floorings are very common. We do see that in many different facilities. Next, we go into number 10. So up to question number 9 is applicable for all of the facilities. Question 10 to 14 is applicable only for facilities who are using chemicals in their production processes. So for number 10, it is employee training on MRSL and RSL. So here the question is, does your facility train employees responsible for chemical management system on restricted chemical lists and MRSL? Chemical substances lists. Ideally, you should be training all of the employees in your facility so that they have a better understanding. People should be aware which is the latest MRSL version that they are looking at. If the MRSL version 3.0 has come in and we have a cutoff date up to November 2023 till when we can implement it, we should try and ensure that our chemical management procedures are also being revised. Whenever there is a revision that is happening, we should try and ensure that this revision is taking into effect. And from November 2023 onwards, your chemical management system will also then only procure your chemicals which are MRSL 3.0 compliant. We should look at how many employees were trained and how frequently, of course, you train your employees on these. Next is your RSL compliance monitoring. So here the question is, does your facility have a documented process to systematically identify, monitor, and verify compliance with all product RSLs and segregate the chemical formulation and materials which are not compliant with RSL? Here, for this particular question, you would ideally require to have an complete understanding of which are the brands that you are catering to, what are their RSL requirements, and at your own end as a supplier, prepare RSL conformance that you are going to as a facility. And based on this RSL requirement, you can take the most stringent value that has been indicated for a particular brand, by a particular brand for that RSL compliance, and then ensure in your chemical management practice that you are maintaining this RSL requirement. And there is also an unscored question here, which is, does your facility have a failure resolution process that is followed in the event of an RSL test failure? So ideally for this question, when there is a test failure that has happened, you should have a procedure of how you will segregate this entire lot, how you will separate them and ensure that the products which have gone into the manufacture of this particular product are all kept separated and they are not contaminated with the rest of your production. And the suggested upload here is written documents specifying how you will do the process recipes considering the usage of the chemicals. All chemical in inventory is checked against your RSL compliances and letter of RSL conformances that you have received from your suppliers. So these are some of the suggested uploads for this question. And next we have question number 2, which is on MRSL compliance monitoring. This question again is very involved question. And here the question is, does your facility have a documented process to systematically monitor, update, and demonstrate compliance with MRSLs, segregate the chemical formulation materials and products which are not compliant with the MRSL? The suggested upload here is your policy, process flow, which can also, it could be from your parent organization. Let's say there is a chemical management procedure that your organization is following. Then you can indicate the corporate level chemical management procedure of how you will do it. You should have a list of all the chemicals that do not have full documentations conforming to their MRSL values, and also plan for obtaining appropriate documentation of the chemicals which where you do not have them. And I will also answer some questions here. Please send in all of the questions via the question and answer function and not via the chat function. Though I do see that, I will answer this for you. For the RSL test, is it possible to use a RSL test of raw materials such as chemical RSL test? Yes, you can use that. Or does it have to be the product RSL? See, when we are talking about RSLs, we are talking about the end product. For a chemical supplier, the end product is his chemical. So for him, when you're talking about an RSL test, it is the end product test that he is doing at his end. But for you as a supplier, when you are talking about the RSL, you're talking about the RSL in the end product that you are manufacturing. If it is a t-shirt that you're supplying to a brand, that is your end product, and that is where you have to undertake the RSL test. I hope that clarifies, and there are some more questions here which I will address. Is it mandatory to have ZDHC compliant chemical certification if getting an OCOTEX certificate for the same chemical from the formulator? See, there is nothing like mandatory. It is the recommendation that you go with the MRSL. Okay, so there is nothing which is mandatory out here. Can you please clarify my query above? Okay, can you please share the training slide? Yes, of course, we will share that. We are 100 score in each module except chemical. Okay, That's very good if you have 100 score in each module. So in chemical, I hope you are able to utilize the value that we are sharing and improve on your score. Please suggest some roadmap or action plan for improving chemical score in the chemical section. Yeah, that will depend on which are the questions you need to actually target to improve your score. For the RSL test, is it possible to use the RSL test of raw materials such as chemical RSL? I think this is the same question which I answered from the chat. Yeah. Okay. Yes, it is the same one. All right. Fine. So this is the question number 12 on level 1, where we are talking about MRSL compliance monitoring. And this is again an advanced question by itself. And are aware that it is quite difficult to maintain the MRSL compliance monitoring, but it is something that you would require to have as a implementation in your chemical management procedure. Remember, end of the day, this is a chemical management system, and it is only with implementing this in your procedure and in your practices and in your SOPs that you are going to be able to maintain and monitor this. Okay, the suggested upload here are MRSLs which are applicable to the facility. You can have positive lists from the chemical suppliers, any kind of email communication trails that you have had with your suppliers to ensure that they are compliant to the MRSL, letter of compliance of the MRSL from the supplier that you would have received. You can upload that. And documented periodical screening process that you have against the ZDHC chemical gateway is also something that you can indicate. And records of previous screening and schedules of your future screenings are what you would require to indicate. And then we come to question number 13, which is also a very involved question here, because here it asks you, can all of your production chemicals be traced from the manufacturing process back to the chemical inventory? Here, you would require to upload the recipe cards with the lot number, the chemical inventory that you have, the chemical mixing log, the process log, etc. There should be a complete traceability from the manufacturing process right back up to the chemical inventory lot numbers that have been used for the process. So this is an example we would like to share here. You have the product here, you have the recipe cards that have gone for the recipe formulation for that particular product. And from the chemicals that have been used in this recipe card, you are able to go back up to the lot number of the chemical substance. That is when you will have traceability, complete traceability that we can indicate. Next, we come to question. Now we have covered up to question 13 are all of your level 1 questions. They will give you a total of 25 points. There are 3 questions in level 2 that have a total of 50 points each, and each of them are very important. And here, question 14 in level 2 is the first question in level 2 is improvement plan for chemical management. In our experience, it is seen that a facility who is going into a chemical management implementation will take at least a full year in order to completely implement all of the different parameters that are required. The very first question that comes up in your level 2 is, do you have an improvement plan? So even if you have said a yes or a partial yes to all of the questions, there are still certain areas where there will be room for improvement, and which is what we would require to follow. You would require to understand which questions have not been fully achieved and why it has not been achieved. You would require to maintain an Excel sheet where you are talking about how you are going to be bringing in this improvement. Let's say in your chemical management, in your chemical inventory, for example, you have up to the foundational level, you have done everything that is required. You can then take it to the progressive and to the aspirational level as well. If in your health and safety plan, you have had many different practices which have already been included, you can then look at what are the next set of practices which you will be able to bring in. Will you be able to bring in a hazard assessment, which will help you to enhance your chemical management system? All of that can be looked at as improvements that you will be able to bring in. Okay, let's go to question number 15, which is hazardous chemical reductions. So here the question is, does your facility have an implementation plan to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals beyond chemicals specified by regulation and RSL, MRSL lists? So this again is a very high level question, and it is not all of the facilities who will be able to answer a yes to this question. Here you are going beyond the RSL, MRSL requirements. You're looking at certain other lists, etc. It could be the SIN list, for example. It could be lists which are there in your MRSL. You're looking at perhaps the candidate list. The MRSL candidate list is a list of chemicals which are going to be considered for a ban, perhaps in the next version of the MRSL. So you're looking ideally here beyond the MRSL list, and you're not looking just at what is there in the MRSL list. So the suggested upload here is a hazardous chemical list with an action plan with assigned abilities and also a time frame for the action. You can also have alternate chemical trials in laboratories, or you can have pilot experiments which are being done in order to come to a conclusion as to how you would be perhaps able to phase out certain chemicals. So all of that can be considered for this particular question. Next is your question number 16, which is on preferred chemical sourcing. And the question here is, does your facility source already approved and preferred chemicals from a positive list beyond chemicals specified by regulations and RSL, MRSL? So here you should have at least more than 50% of your chemical formulations from such chemical inventory. It could be your ZDHC MRSL level 3, or it could be a blue sign, or it could be OTS list, etc. And you can answer a partial yes again to this question if your chemicals in the inventory make up to less than 50% of your chemical inventory. Now this 50% limit that is there is for facilities who are using chemicals in their production processes. If you're using it only in tooling and in sanitation, etc., for maintaining your facility, then the limit here is 10%. So this is something that we need to remember. And what exactly is preferred chemical sourcing? You can use or you can look at perhaps something like a blue sign blue finder, which has both your blue and gray rated chemistry. You can be procuring your chemicals from that. You can look at ZDHC MRSL level 3 with product stewardship for this particular question, or you could be sourcing chemicals from full material disclosures with tox assessment, which is being done. You could be looking at customer or a supplier who has an MRSL or a positive list for chemicals with Chem IQ screening that has been done. And these are again some examples of how you would be able to look at lists and for preferred chemical sourcing. Next is your question 17, which is on brand or chemical supplier collaboration. Does your facility collaborate with brands and chemical suppliers to select chemicals for alternative assessment? Here, your suggested upload is your prioritized list for alternative chemicals. You can look at, let us say you want to phase out PFAS from your production cycles. That may be perhaps a priority for you. You can then be collaborating with certain brands on work on how you would be able to phase this out from your productions. What would be required to be uploaded would be the information of such minutes of meetings that have been done with the brands, etc. Next, we have question number 18. This is also a high-level question. Does your facility contribute a chemical analysis against human and environmental hazard criteria, for example, persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, to this alternative process? So if you are answering a yes, a hazard chemical assessment should have been conducted at your facility. You should be using this information from the hazard assessment to prioritize and create an action plan with implementation towards safer alternatives. Okay, I'm coming here back to some questions which are there. Ocotex certificate means please clear. So Ocotex is an organization which issues certificates based on the compliance level. So they conduct certain tests at their end. So Ocotex certificate means that a certain screening has been done for your chemical. We don't use any hazardous chemicals, only use chemicals such as diesel, spot cleaner, etc. How can an implementation plan to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals? Okay, what you would require to then undertake is what is the quantity of the chemical that is there in your facility? What are the type of chemicals? If the spot cleaner has VOCs in it, is this VOC harmful to a worker? What is the limit level that is required to be maintained? So an improvement plan can be established for anything, because definitely when we are talking about an improvement, there is certainly an improvement that can happen at any level that you talk about the difference between REACH, SVHC, and MRSL. MRSL we have already covered. REACH and SVHC, these are substances of very high concern, your SVHC, and REACH is a regulation that has been brought in to the EU, where they talk about what are the parameters that are required for REACH compliance. There are many different parameters that are required. It is an extremely vast topic, so we might not be able to cover that here in our session today. But please do come in for some of our trainings, because that would be, we do cover quite a bit of this information in our detailed training sessions, in the ZDHC training sessions, etc. Let's talk about life cycle impact. This is your question number 19, which asks you, does your facility contribute to a life cycle analysis for or impacts to this alternative process? A life cycle analysis can be done for any of the products that you are using. And let us say you have done analysis, maybe using a Blue Sign Blue expert assessment, or maybe certain CA studies that have been done on for your facility. You can indicate those. And these are all generally third-party assessments that you will have to indicate. There is also something called a MFCA, or a material flow cost accounting, that is done. And this will also show you how your product basically fares against the normal other products that are there in the market. Next is your question number 20, which is on traceability to lot number. This again is, now you had your question number 13, which talked about the traceability from the manufacturing process to the lot number. But question number 20 is where they are talking about the traceability from the end product, from the product lot number back to the chemical lot number. So this is a further detailed question here, and you will have to show the entire traceability cycle that you have, or the traceability line that you have, in order to say a yes to this question. You will have to indicate your product batch card, what are the recipes that are used, what is the mixing, blending logs, etc. that are available, what is the chemical storage log that is available. And only if there is a complete traceability will you be then in a position to say yes to this question. And you also again have the option of saying a partial yes to these questions if it is not available for all of your chemicals, but it is available for some of your chemicals. Question 21 is the documented quality assurance program. The question here is, does your facility have a documented QA program which includes the performance of the chemicals? So the chemicals that are coming into your facility, ideally you should have a procedure where you are able to check for the conformance. If it is a dye stuff, is the depth of the shade that you are going to be able to develop with that dye stuff, is it correct or not? If you're looking at an auxiliary, what is the solid content of the auxiliary that has come in, so that you are aware as to what is the quality of the chemical or the dye stuff that the supplier has given you for that particular lot. You should also be asking for the COA of the particular chemicals that are coming in, certificate of analysis for each individual lot numbers of the batches that the supplier is actually giving you for each delivery. So the program should actually include the evaluation of the quality and performance efficacy for the chemical formulation which is used. You should be able to ensure the process recipes of how each chemical formulation are used and are strictly followed. If you have a 9001 system already implemented in your facility, you can go with what is the quality assurance program that is being done for your incoming goods. This is something that you would be able to show. Process controls, how are you doing your process controls for the incoming material? What are the ongoing assessments for production quality, also with any of the supporting records? This is what would require to be checked into. Next, we have question 22, which is on contractor or subcontractor preferred chemicals. So here we saw that in the module, we talked about whether you are following the processes. So this question is actually asking you, do your subcontractors and subcontractors also source already approved or preferred chemicals from positive lists to replace the chemicals not included in the RSL, MRSL? This is your suggested approach. What are the procedures that you are following? What is the communication that you are having with your suppliers and subcontractors, and the Higg verification reports from the suppliers and subcontractors is what you will be actually using. And then we come to the very last question in chemical management, which is question 23, which is on sustainable chemistry innovation. Does your facility have a documented business goals, processes, and actions showing commitment? For example, the equipment, are you improving on the equipment? The choice or substitute of chemicals, are you going in for chemicals which are more energy, which are more resource efficient? Are you trying to use new sustainable chemistry innovations? Are you moving towards enzymes perhaps for your different wet processing requirements? Are you using salt-free or waterless dyeing options? All of this, these are not questions, of course, where you will be able to bring in immediate improvement, but definitely when you are sitting down and talking as your environmental management team within your facility, you can talk about how you would be able to bring in these improvements to your facility. Will you be able to recover salt from your ETP? Are you able to do that? What kind of investment would you require if you're trying to do that? Can you do bleaching without chemicals? Can we look at maybe a solvent-free processing? Can we look at maybe carbon dioxide or dyings? Can we look at electrochemical dyings, for example? So these are all advanced level operations which you would be in a position to consider. And here, let us say you want to say a yes to this question, you would require to show that these discussions have happened in your environmental management system or in your environmental management RMs, as they are called. And you are considering this. There have been a certain research, there have been quotations that have been asked from the different suppliers. There have been workings that have been done to understand what are the kind of savings that you as an organization will be able to make. So this is when you would be able to say a yes to this particular question. Yeah, this is a rather long subject and session. Let's go to look at what are the further questions that are there. Okay, there's a repeat, I think, of this question. Which company globally has highest chemical score? So like I said, there is nothing like a highest chemical score. You will require to understand what are there in your chemical management practices. There is a question on, can you describe PLCA? And LCA stands for life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment is a very detailed assessment where you understand what are the materials that are going in, what are the impact of the materials that is going in, what is the impact of the product. So LCAs can be done from cradle to grave and also cradle to cradle. That is right from the time the material is coming into your facility till the time it is going into the soil or undergoing biodegradation. You will then have to take basically maybe a t-shirt right from the time the raw materials are procured till the time it is degrading into the soil, is where you will be able to do a complete life cycle analysis of a particular product. So for each different product, depending on the type of material that is used, it could be cotton, it could be polyester. So that is where LCA is done. PLCA stands for a product life cycle assessment. ISO 9001 certification can show for quality assurance plan. Yes, definitely. If you have an ISO 9001, it means that there are certain practices that have already been established in your facility for quality assurance factors which have been incorporated, and you can show that. What type of hazard we can take to make a hazardous chemical list? There are many different types of hazards which can be indicated, but this will completely depend on the type of chemicals that you are bringing into your facility. First of all, you should study your chemical inventory understand the hazards, and then make a list of what are the type of hazards that you would require to be prepared for. Okay, I think all of the questions here have been answered. We would definitely encourage you to get in touch with us for also all of your queries that you might have, and we will be happy to help you with that. I can see that some participants have raised hands. Unfortunately, we will not have the time to unmute and speak. We are a little tight on time here. And before we sign off, I would like to introduce our local verifiers and trainers. You will, of course, get this presentation from us, but we do have a team in place, and I would encourage you to kindly get in touch with one of our team members. They will definitely be able to help you for both your verification as well as any type of consultation requirements that you may have. And here we have, once this recording is also available, I will be updating this on the slide here, and we have all of the different sections. The recordings as well will be available. Do stay tuned. We have also a number of other webinar sessions which we are conducting, and I would like to encourage you to visit this particular page. I have shared this link in our chat section. So this is our webinars and training page. Please do visit that. We come up with a lot of informative webinars. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. Some of the ZDHC trainings, all of them you will receive a certificate after the training, which you will be able to use for your current year, for your current cadence. You can indicate that, you can be showing that to your brands to let them know that you are certified. Khadija, I see that it says it doesn't show up. You can just visit the link here, the training link, and or maybe we will just put this also as an information in our newsletter that you will be receiving. And please ensure that you subscribe to our newsletter. We were trying to understand as to why the mails were not going to certain personnel. So if you unsubscribe from our newsletter, unfortunately, you will not receive any mails. So please do subscribe to our newsletter and ensure that you are receiving the information. We will, of course, be coming out with more of these sessions. And this is our entire team. We will be able to definitely help you with your verifications and your queries. Feel free to reach out to us. Okay, yeah, I think all of the questions have been answered. And yeah, we will see you in our next webinar. I do hope you will be able to receive all of our newsletter information, all of the information that we share. We are a small team, but we are definitely committed to help all of you improve in your environmental performances in your respective facilities. And hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you for attending this and have a nice day. Bye-bye.